Charlie Kirk is, yet the most obvious question, who ordered it, is the one nobody in power wants to touch.
Why is it a problem for the people in power? Because once again, it circumscribes what they can do. It sets a limit on their powers. If other people have souls, if they, like you, were created by God, then they have freedom of conscience. You can tell them what they ought to think, but you can't make them. You can tell them what they ought to say, but you can't force them. Christianity does not convert by the sword. It can't. It requires free will, and it requires free will because it respects the individual conscience emanating from the distinct soul of every human being. And that is why in the West, which is based on Christianity, our civilization is a Christian civilization, tattered though it currently is. Collective punishment, hurting people for the sins of their relatives, is unthinkable. Because each person will stand alone as he was made before God. And every person is equal before God, fundamentally. Doesn't mean each person is equal in his ability. It doesn't mean each person is equal in the choices he makes. Of course not. But it means that every person is a human being with a divine spark inside. That is the core assumption of Christianity. And it was obvious when you watch Charlie Kirk that he believed that. Charlie's been famously quoted for the last couple of days saying he abhors anti-Semitism. That is absolutely right. And he did. He said that in public, and he said it very often in private. He meant it too. But he abhorred racism and bigotry on the basis of genetics of all kinds because he was a Christian. And he believed that God created each person. Now, why is this a problem for temporal authorities?
Tucker asserts that free speech is a problem for those in power because it places a hard limit on how far their control can reach.
Why is it a problem for the people in power? Because once again, it circumscribes what they can do. It sets a limit on their powers. If God created each person, including the infuriating, annoying, disastrously wrong person I'm talking to, then I can't force him to repeat my creed. I'm not in charge of his conscience. Only he is. And that is a limit. So when Charlie Kirk said, I believe in free speech, he didn't simply believe in free speech because it was in the Bill of Rights. He understood that it was in the Bill of Rights because it's in the New Testament. He understood that's a right that comes from God, bestowed on all of us at birth. And he felt his job, his duty, was not simply to protect it, but to live it, to show people what that looks like. And I just want to play, of the many clips we could play of Charlie Kirk on college campuses, he spent his whole life worn out most of the time. And as an older man, I often said to him, how the hell do you get on plane after plane after plane? But he felt an evangelical duty, small e evangelical duty, to do it, to get out there and talk to people. Why? Not simply to build a coalition or get this or that person elected, but because he believed as a Christian that convincing people voluntarily with words, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So the Gospel of John begins. Words are the key to winning people's minds and their souls. And he really meant this. He wasn't just repeating the words. He meant it, and it was obvious in the way that he interacted with people who disagreed with him and people who hated him.
Tucker talks about his first impression of Charlie, recalling how quickly they connected and how that bond grew into a genuine friendship.
You know, Tucker, I think you know this, and some of you know this because I wrote about it on X.com, but when X.com was Twitter, I did an interview with the Tucker Carlson Tonight Show on Fox News, and I got a message from a guy named Charlie Kirk that said, you did a great job, I really liked what you said, and let's keep in touch. And that began the start of my friendship with Charlie Kirk. That was the first time I had ever communicated with Charlie Kirk. So you've known him for a long time. You talked to him about a lot of issues, and I want to talk in part about how to honor Charlie's legacy, because I think that he modeled civil discourse within the right. He accepted there were big disagreements on all these issues, but he thought we were all on the same team and we could debate this stuff, but actually have a drink at the end of the day and recognize that we were all trying to accomplish fundamentally the good of the country. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Before I get there, just tell me about your buddy, Charlie Kirk. What was he like? What did people who only know him from radio or TV not appreciate about what a good guy he was?
That his Christianity was sincere, and his commitment to Jesus was totally sincere. And it, sometimes isn't, especially in public figures who throw out Bible verses they don't understand and stuff like that. But in his case, not speaking to him in particular, but in his case, it informed every single part of his life, from his marriage to the way he treated his children, to the way he treated his staff, to the way he approached disagreement, to the way he thought of other people, which was always primarily as people first. And that was, he was much younger than I am, and I met him when he was a teenager, so he's literally the age of one of my children. So it was kind of hard to take him seriously at first. And over the years that I knew him, more than 10 years, I ended up learning from him. And I'm not just saying this because he's passed. I mean that sincerely. And the main thing that I learned from him was how to disagree with people on topics that you take very seriously and that they take very seriously without hating them, without feeling bitterness. I mean, it wasn't, people knew what was going on behind the scenes. There was a lot going on behind the scenes, and it was intense, and it was bitter.
Tucker asserts that the divide inside the Republican Party is undeniable, especially on foreign policy, where one side pushes endless intervention while the other demands restraint.
And, because the divide, particularly in foreign policy questions, is very real in the Republican Party. The neocons versus the realists, or however you want to describe it, he was on the realist side for sure. But he was mad at the people who disagreed with him. He liked them as people. He agreed with them on some things. And he would always say that, I agree. In private, he would say that. And, I was involved in it because people were mad at him for having me at his conferences or for talking to me. And so we had cause to talk about it a lot up until he was. And I was so struck the whole time. I would say, I would use the ugly language I'm famous for in private, and he would never talk like that. He would say, well, I agree with him on this, but obviously I'm on your side on that. And he just never forgot there was a person behind the views, and that inspired me. And God commands that of us. That's a real commandment, in my opinion. And he lived it.
That's exactly right, Tucker. He treated everybody with respect, and because he genuinely loved people and he genuinely wanted their salvation, he wanted them to have a relationship with God, he wanted them to know the truth, he always treated them with respect, maybe especially when he disagreed with them.
Tucker talks about Charlie's impact on shaping the coalition that fueled Donald Trump, noting how his voice influenced debates on foreign policy and challenged the establishment consensus.
And I think about this, so you talked about foreign policy. That is one of the big divides on the American right now. And the thing that Charlie seemed to understand intuitively is that the coalition that made Donald Trump the President of the United States and J.D. Vance the Vice President of the United States, it included Tucker Carlson, but also Ben Shapiro. It included people who did disagree vociferously, but agreed on 70 or 80% of issues. And fundamentally, the question Charlie would ask is, if you're a good faith person and you're trying to do right, then you are part of the Big Ten. And I think that's something that we have to try to model together, because Charlie's no longer around to do it for us. And one way in particular, I was very touched by this. I actually texted Mark about this because, you very generously have put out some donation link to help support Charlie's family. And think about it. Erica and the kids, most importantly, they're grieving the loss of a dear husband and father, but we're going to have to step in and fill the gap to provide for them in a way that Charlie no longer can't, because he was taken down by an bullet. Who I saw share that link was Mark Levin.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really good example of how Charlie was able to bring people together from across our movement, so long as we were operating in good faith. That was the question. If you were good faith, you're on his team.
That is exactly right. And good faith is the measure. And I have to say, I think now is exactly the wrong time to appropriate the memory of someone and the emotion that comes with that, the really intense emotion that all of us feel, and use it for your own parochial ends. Like, he stood for this, and I think the reason that Charlie was able to bridge the gap, particularly in foreign policy, is because he had, for example, genuine affection for Israel, which he expressed to me in private many, many times. Like, I love Israel. I don't think we should have another forever regime change against Iran.
By the way, the official story can be right. Just because it's the official story doesn't mean it's a lie. My first thought was, well, this is obviously some kind of, manufactured attempt to divide the country against itself, and it's probably all fake. And then you look, and it's actually not fake.
Tucker Carlson leaked the whole secrets about the Charlie Kirk shootings, exposing what was hidden from the public and sparking questions the media refused to ask.
But of course, it's a much larger round. It is, in fact, an old-fashioned military round. It's 30-06, 30 caliber, big round. And that, people who understand, I guess all I'm saying without getting sidetracked is, whoever contemplated this and pulled it off and committed the, had thought about it and was clearly, I'm not saying it was, I don't know who it was, but it wasn't clearly not some random guy who got mad yesterday morning and decided to do it. Obviously.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There was great forethought in that.
Tucker claims he learned from Charlie how to disagree with people on tough topics without losing respect or common ground.
So that's all we know of it. Again, I think, my life certainly over the last 10 years proves that I'm not an acceptor of the official story just because it's the official story. By the way, the official story can be right, just because it's the official story doesn't mean it's a lie. But I think
there can also be more to the official story.
To our own, well, that's true. And part of the problem with living to 56 is you've seen so much, and I grew up around a lot of this stuff already, that you can just get lost in it, completely lost in it, because a lot of things over time that are, the truth about some things. You don't know the truth. I don't know the truth about everything. That's for sure. There are many more things I'm ignorant on that I'm knowledgeable about. However, I've seen enough and been into enough dinners where people are like, well, da-da-da-da-da, and you're thinking to yourself, you have no idea what actually happened.
If you enjoyed today's video on Anonymous Official, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks for watching and sticking with us.